During World War II, German magnetic mines lay undetected on the ocean floor. They required no physical contact to detonate. Instead, internal sensors triggered the explosive the moment they detected the distinct vertical magnetic field of a passing vessel. These fields were a byproduct of the ship's own construction. As a steel hull navigates the ocean, it continuously absorbs the Earth's natural magnetic field. The movement of the heavy steel through the water effectively charges the vessel, concentrating a specific magnetic signature within its structural framework. To render these ships invisible to the mines, naval engineers introduced degaussing. They wrapped the hull in heavy copper cables and fired an overwhelming alternating electrical pulse through the metal. This scrambled the trapped magnetic signature, dropping the net magnetic resonance back to absolute zero. This principle of persistent signatures extends to digital media. High-density hard drives possess extreme coercivity, a resistance to demagnetization that allows data to remain physically intact even after a standard format. To clear this data remnants, engineers use a professional degausser to fire a magnetic pulse at least twice as powerful as the media's coercivity, scrambling the microscopic domains back to total randomness. A similar functional persistence occurs within the human brainstem, specifically in a network called the Velocity Storage Integrator, or VSI. In Maladaptive syndrome, the VSI has entered a state of functional neural remnants. After prolonged exposure to passive, oscillating motion inside a moving vessel, the subcortical network continues to hold a ghost charge of multi-axis kinetic energy. Attempting to resolve this through standard clinical habituation is identical to adjusting the screen brightness on a permanently warped magnetized monitor. Habituation fails because it cannot clear the core hardware distortion. To eliminate the phantom motion of MDDS, the clinician must execute a systemic neurocomputational flush of the central nervous system to return the brain to an absolute terrestrial zero. The primary rule of degaussing dictates that before any system can be purged with a pulse, it must be perfectly grounded. The first phase of the zero-out method applies this rule biologically. The clinician places the patient in a supported physical position, whether seated, side-lying, or supine. Looking at this 3D wireframe model, we can map the inputs required to build this ground wire. First is the vestibular truth. The constant 1G pull of gravity on the inner ear's otoliths, combined with the resting baseline of the semicircular canals, confirms a total lack of motion. Next is the somatosensory truth. High-fidelity inputs from cutaneous mechanoreceptors and joint capsules deliver unyielding data that the body is in strict, sustained contact with a solid surface. Finally, the cognitive truth. The patient's higher cortical brain remains fully engaged and calm, recognizing the environment and validating physical safety. Stacking these sensory inputs creates the ultimate biological ground wire. It delivers the highest fidelity data the human nervous system possesses, providing the central processor with undeniable proof that the body is bolted to a stationary surface. A common misconception in vestibular therapy involves treating MDDS by asking the patient to track moving visual targets with their eyes. In this anatomical trace, we see the parvocellular pathway, highlighted in yellow. Originating from small P ganglion cells in the retina, this network projects to the ventral stream, specializing in high-acuity foveal perception and object recognition. This specific cortical network drives smooth pursuit and voluntary oculomotor tracking reflexes. When a patient's eyes track moving lines, they engage this parvocellular network. This active tracking feeds data directly into the corrupted VFI. Instead of clearing the ghost charge, this active engagement stores more errant, multi-axis kinetic energy into the subcortical network. Traditional tracking exercises fail because these eye movements act as a slow, continuous charge to an already overloaded battery, deepening the maladaptive state. The zero-out method utilizes a different clinical pivot: strict foveal fixation. The clinician requires the patient to lock their eyes onto a completely stationary anchor point while a wide-field background moves around them. Holding a fixed gaze fully suppresses the oculomotor tracking reflex, shutting down cortical engagement. Watch how the visual circuit shifts. The yellow cortical pathway dims entirely. Instead, the stimulus saturates the magnocellular pathway, a network of fast-conducting M ganglion cells specialized for wide-field spatial orientation. Because the eyes are not tracking, this pathway bypasses cortical object recognition completely. The visual signal projects directly to the accessory optic system and the nucleus of the optic tract. These structures serve as the literal input channels for the VSI. This saturation induces pure vection, an overwhelming subcortical illusion of self-motion generated entirely in the brainstem. Bypassing the cortex to inject this visual torque straight into the VSI serves as the neurocomputational equivalent of firing a massive degaussing pulse. The millisecond this wide-field visual flow begins, the central nervous system is trapped in a structural paradox. Look at these three vectors converging on the central processor. The first input is the visual system. Flooded by vection, it reports that the body is moving rapidly in a specific direction. The second input is the biological ground wire. The somatosensory and vestibular anchors report with equal intensity that the body is at absolute zero. The third input is the corrupted VSI matrix, still outputting its phantom signature of rocking and heaving. The brain cannot sustain three irreconcilable realities simultaneously without risking total postural collapse. Faced with overwhelming top-down visual torque colliding against unyielding physical reality, the central processor is forced to make a radical, immediate deletion to ensure terrestrial survival. The decision resides in the caudal portions of the cerebellar vermis, the brain's baseline equilibrium center. The vestibulocerebellum is evolutionarily hardwired to prioritize gravity-dependent somatosensory anchors because terrestrial survival depends on physical footing, not visual illusions. Zooming into the cerebellar nodulus, the Purkinje cells recognize the massive software error in the VSI. They deploy a heavy inhibitory block, clamping down on the oscillating vestibular nuclei below. This sudden GABA-mediated inhibitory clamp acts directly on the downstream vestibular neurons. This emergency mechanism, known as dumping, forces the VSI to instantly short-circuit. The system violently releases its stored kinetic energy. The off-diagonal cross-coupling elements within the neural matrix instantly collapse. The maladaptive software patch is wiped through rapid neuroplasticity and hard learning. This neurotransmitter clamp is the biological realization of pushing the degauss button, flushing the hardware, and ending the phantom motion. The zero-out method works because it reverse engineers the exact sensory conditions that acquired MDDS in the first place. Whether the syndrome began from prolonged passive motion on a ship or spontaneously after a neurological insult like a vestibular migraine, the result is the same. The central nervous system wrote the same maladaptive protective patch, and it requires the same structural deletion. Clearing the matrix requires the physical ground wire and overwhelming magnocellular pulse. Clinicians systematically run this process across multiple visual axes, linear, angular, dot, and bar, flushing every vector. The brain accepts one law. When the body says it is not moving, it is not moving. Resolution of MDDS requires the brain to confront the uncompromising physics of the grounded body. By forcing a subcortical purge through this sensory collision, the central nervous system returns to absolute terrestrial zero.